Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be a theory video slash an explanation video. I've seen the fandom confuse universe, timeline, dimension, and realm. They use them interchangeably. Either they don't understand or they think they're all the same thing. So this video is going to explain how the franchise is set up. If you don't want any spoilers, I suggest clicking out of the video now. And without further ado, we're just going to jump right into it. So, the idea for this video all stemmed from this character here. This is an ant drone from Crash Twinsanity. In Crash on the Run, there is a character called the mutagen ant drone. Its description says that it is created by Neocore Tech. So Cortex created these ants. I thought nothing of it. Ant drone is a generic term, so I assumed the characters had nothing in common. However, I was on the Crash on the Run Twitter account, and this tweet says, "Remember the ant drones from Twinsanity? Well, it looks like they've drunk a little bit too much mutagen." So you have the ant drone from Twinsanity here. The tweet says that they're one and the same. They've just drunk a little too much mutagen. So this ant drone here became this ant drone by drinking mutagen. So Cortex must have gone to the 10th dimension, grabbed a bunch of ant drones, and fed the mutagen to create the ant drones here, the mutagen ant drone. But then what about the frosty ant drone, or the inferno ant drone, or the oxide ant drone? Cortex isn't feeding them different mutagens to create these. These ants are coming from alternate universes. So the oxide version of Cortex went to the oxide version of the 10th dimension, grabbed the ants, brought them to his home dimension, fed them mutagen, and created the oxide ant, the inferno ant, and the frosty ant. So hopefully you haven't run away yet, because believe me, this gets way more interesting. So I'm going to start off with the Crash timeline. We're going to just get the timeline out of the way. So this is the Crash timeline, the prime timeline, which would be the prime dimension. So this is the first dimension. It's not stated to be the first dimension, but just for this video, we're going to call the game series that we follow the first dimension. So this would be the timeline of the first dimension. And I have another video that I will link in the description that explains this timeline. I'm not going to get into it here, but pretty much all you need to know is the start of the timeline is Crash Bandicoot 1, and the ending of the timeline is Crash Bandicoot on the Run. The next dimension that we're introduced to in the series is, we never actually see it, but we know that Entrance comes from the 5th dimension. So we have prime dimension, 5th dimension. So keep in mind, that is not a different timeline. That is a different dimension. Crash's dimension is the first timeline. Then Entrance's homeworld is the 5th dimension. Then there's the 10th dimension with the ant drone, the evil twins. Evil Crash lives on Twinsanity Island, which is in the 10th dimension. Crash Bandicoot 4 is a great game, but it definitely contributes to everyone's confusion when it comes to dimensions and timelines. In Crash 4, multiple dimensions are shown, one of which is the 11th dimension, and you go to 1954 in the 11th dimension. You aren't traveling to 1954 in the prime dimension in Crash's timeline. You are going to the 11th dimension. It's the snowy area. This dimension is not named. It is Tawna, the alternate Tawna's slash female entropy's home dimension, where female entropy killed that dimension's version of Crash and Coco. And honestly, I understand people's confusion, because even the game itself makes it seem like you are going to an alternate universe to encounter this Tawna. When you unlock her, it says Tawna Timelines Unlocked. Tawna's got her own agenda. Play her timelines to see how she crosses paths with Crash and Coco. When you meet the alternate version of Tawna, she is not in her home dimension. She has been pulled through one of the rifts that Uka Uka created, and she ended up crossing paths with Crash and Coco from the Prime Dimension. When the game says alternate timelines, it doesn't mean alternate timelines. It means you are playing the game from Tawna's perspective in levels that you've already played with Crash or Coco. So it's an alternate perspective of a level you've already played, which to this game means it's an alternate timeline of said levels. Not an alternate timeline, just a different portion of the level. Again, I don't know why they had to include time frames of the dimensions they're going to. It just helped create more confusion. Another dimension introduced was the Oedipus dimension, 88 million years before Crash Bandicoot or before Coco Bandicoot, whatever you want. And then there's one more dimension that was introduced. The Snacks dimension of 3023. Other worlds that you play in Crash Bandicoot 4 are not different dimensions. They are different time periods from the Prime Crash timeline. Other time frames were Hazardous Waste, I believe that's 2084, so the future of Crash's timeline. Salty Wharf, which was the pirate-themed levels, which was 1717, where you met alternate Tawna. Tranquility Falls, which was 1402, the Japanese-themed levels. And then Dingo Dial's Marsh level, Oxides, Space Area, those, and the Insanity Island in 1996. They were all part of the Prime timeline, just different time periods in that timeline. So now we're going to have to zoom out on this timeline, otherwise it's going to get way too cluttered. So we have Dimension 1, Dimension 5, Dimension 10, 11, the Unnamed Dimension, Oedipus Dimension, and the Snacks Dimension. So those are all of the dimensions in the Crash Bandicoot canon. And now we're going to color code it because all of this is contained in a universe. So all of these dimensions we can call the Prime Universe. Existing outside of the Prime Universe but still connected to it is Spyro. You have Spyro's Dragon Realms, Avalar, and the Forgotten Realms. They're all linked to the Crash Bandicoot universe, but they are not in the Crash Bandicoot universe. So this is where it gets confusing, that someone might want to call this a dimension, but this is a realm. So you have the universe, the dimensions, and then the Dragon Realms, which contains Avalar and the Forgotten Realm, are off in their own little pocket outside of the universe. A nice way to think about it is the Crash Bandicoot universe is more science-based, so even if when there is magic, it's like mojo magic, whereas like voodoo and stuff. But when you go over to the Crash realm, or the Spyro realms, it's actual magic. So again, that is the Prime Universe, and we're going to zoom out a little more. So now you see the Prime Universe. We have Crash and Coco and Cortex, and then over on Spyro's realm there, you have Spyro and Dark Spyro. it's going to make more sense in a second. The reason that I included Cortex and Dark Spyro in these, and rather than just having Crash and Spyro, is because of this. The Frosty Universe. This is introduced in Crash on the Run. We don't see said universe, but we see the inhabitants of said universe come to our Prime universe. So we have the Frosty Universe, which has Frosty, Cortex, and Frosty, Dark Spyro. Then we have the Inferno Universe, which has Inferno Cortex and Inferno Dark Spyro. And lastly, we have the Oxide Universe, which has an Oxide Cortex and an Oxide Dark Spyro. So, Inferno and Frosty Dark Spyro have not been introduced yet, as far as I'm aware. They may have been, and I just haven't got to them yet. But Oxide Dark Spyro definitely exists. So even if people want to say, oh, Frosty and Inferno don't exist, the theory still holds true because we have already had the Oxide version of Dark Spyro. So just to recap, we have 4 different universes, and each universe has their own dimensions. I had to zoom in because it would get crazy complicated with all of the different dimensions, timelines, and universes. So potentially, there should be a Frosty Crash Bandicoot, a Inferno Crash Bandicoot, and an Oxide Crash Bandicoot. Whether they ever show up is another thing. So these are the 4 universes that we have been introduced to. There may be more, there may not be. But at the moment in time, we've got these 4 universes, which make up the multiverse. So all of the realms, dimensions, and timelines are in their own universes, and all of the universes are in the multiverse, which is what Cortex is trying to take over in Crash on the Run. We're almost done. There's only a little bit more. So now we're going to zoom out again, and we have the multiverse, which has everything we've already discussed. But there's one more place in the canon of the franchise that we have not discussed. Hyperspace. Hyperspace exists outside of space and time. Everything that I have disclosed thus far was all in canon of the franchise. This part is more of my headcanon, but it still fits with what I'm going to explain. So here we have the hyperspace temple that Crash Bash takes place in, and Crash Bandicoot 2 in Trance. Here we have somewhere else in hyperspace, is what they said when it appeared, is the hyperspace island, and then here is another hyperspace temple. So why I believe this exists outside of the multiverse and is in its own space is because of the ending of 2 in Trance. And Trance says it should have taken 1,000,000 years to find us. How? Aku Aku replies, time does not pass in the vortex. I had all the time I needed to find you. So time does not exist here. And clearly, space doesn't act the same because they're floating in a void and somehow are able to breathe and stuff. So this is its own, I don't want to say dimension, because it's kind of like a pocket dimension all of its own, but it exists outside of the multiverse. And another reason why I believe this is this reason. The elemental masks are from this hyperspace temple, and they do not have any variants of any sort. They are one and only. There are no variants to them, as in there are multiple universes in the multiverse. We do not have a Frosty, Inferno, or Oxide version of any of these masks. They are the one and only. So, that's my theory. I hope that I explained it well enough for people. I want you all to know that there is a multiverse and there is hyperspace. So we have the multiverse and hyperspace, and when you zoom into the multiverse, it has the 4 universes that we know of. And when you zoom into the prime universe, you have the prime dimension with all the other dimensions that we've been shown in the series, and the dragon realms. And if you zoom in further, you are shown the prime dimension, the main timeline of the franchise. So that's the whole theory, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I usually don't get that many comments, but please, if you disagree with me, that's fine, but I want to know why you disagree with me. Because for whatever reason, no matter how many times it's said by the developers or the creators that it is all one timeline, people seem to think that everything after Crash 3 has been written out of continuity because of Crash 4. Crash 4 is a midquel. It takes place in between Crash 3 and Crash Team Racing. Like I said, I'm going to link my timeline video also if people haven't seen it, which is probably likely because it doesn't have that many views. But anyway, I appreciate you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been on the back burner for a while, and it's nice to get it all out there. We'll see you next time. Take care.